Welcome to the spine-tingling world of our unholy tales, where fear takes its darkest form and every shadow holds a chilling secret. We are your guides through the twisted and nightmarish tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat, clutching your pillow for dear life. Get ready to embark on a journey into the abyss of your deepest fears as we explore the realms of the supernatural, the macabre, and the unknown. The old white house stood ominously at the end of the winding dirt road, tucked back in the dense woods far from any other signs of life. Ivy crawled lazily up its weathered clapboard siding like the hands of an unseen beast, reaching for the darkened windows as if ready to pull the house down into the earth. "This is the place," Jason said proudly as the SUV came to a stop. He cut the lights and engine, allowing the 7 friends to stare ahead at their weekend retreat. "You're sure no one lives here?" Rachel asked, peering nervously at the dingy curtains covering the windows on the 2nd floor. "Nah. My cousin used to come out here for parties years ago before the owner died," Jason replied. "It's been abandoned for over a decade, he told me." "Sweet. Then it's all ours," hollered Brad as he burst through the back door into the muggy summer night. The rest of them eagerly followed behind, hauling bags of beer and provisions for their secret getaway. They were all students at the nearby college who needed to blow off a little steam before finals. Being only 20 years old, partying took precedence over things like permission or adherence to rules or common sense. The inside of the ramshackle old home smelled musty, hints of rotting wood and mould. Most of the furniture had long been removed, save an old floral print sofa and a couple of battered armchairs. The caricature portraits still clinging to the faded flowery wallpaper watched the new inhabitants with hollow eyes as the intruders stomped around assessing the situation. They noted the peeling paint, the layer of filth, the cracks creeping across the plaster ceilings. To them, it was perfect. Soon the booming stereo drowned out the sounds of rustling wildlife with pounding bass, and the living room coffee table became a beer pong battleground. Laughter, shouting, and playful bravado ensued well past midnight as the house embraced this disruption to its solitude. James snuck upstairs to see if any of the rooms were usable, aside from being coated in dust and spotted with curious stains. "Whoa! Check this out!" James yelled as the others took notice and ascended the creaky staircase. He opened an oak door with flaking white paint to reveal an unexpectedly immaculate bedroom. Maroon velvet drapes still parted to reveal spotless diamond grid windows looking out over a meadow behind the house. An untouched 4-post bed with exquisitely carved poles stood against the far wall, a burgundy brocade comforter smoothed neatly across the mattress without a wrinkle. A vanity with an oval mirror supported various rose-carved brushes and perfume bottles, all regimentally aligned. The porcelain washbasin and pitcher still had water clear as crystal in them despite the home's abandonment. It was weirdly pristine, like this room alone remained frozen in time while the rest succumbed to decay. "Dude, you could totally smash in this bed!" Brad exclaimed before throwing himself onto the only object in the house that had evaded dust and rot. Just as a loud crack split the air, his face planted into a termite-eaten hole in the wood frame where the elegant headboard had been attached. His wiry legs dangled down into the space between wall and bed, both of which shuddered under his sudden weight. "Or maybe not," James laughed, shaking his head. Brad extracted himself with skinned hands, just as noticing Alexandria had been quiet. They looked over to see her captivated at the view from the window of the twinkling meadow under the waxing moon. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked. "I think so," Alex murmured in response without looking back. "There's something about this room." Her voice seemed distant as she took another step closer toward the window as if in a stupor. She slowly lifted the glass and let the sweet breeze float in, thick with honeysuckle and damp earth. Brandon staggered through the doorway, trying to balance an armload of beer cans and associated commentary on their unusual find. "Well, ain't this fancy as fur—" His sentence cut short along with his breath as an unseen force yanked the bedroom door from his grasp and slammed it shut in his face. The reverberations of solid oak against frame silenced all side conversations as they froze in bewilderment. Brad scrambled upright just as the fireplace burst to life with a roar, bathing the room in wavering golden light against the cobwebs that hung from the soot-stained brickwork. Alex remained entranced by the moonlight in the meadow just beyond the window. No one spoke or moved, until the doorknob started rattling violently. Frozen in place, all eyes were locked on the shuddering brass knob being worked from the other side. The fear flooding their bodies was almost as palpable as the party vibes had once been. Loud thuds followed by splintering wood resounded as the door appeared to buckle under some intense force. "What the hell?" Brandon shouted. Rachel squeezed Jason's hand so hard he thought it might shatter. Alex still hadn't flinched from her moonlit perch. One last crunching crack exploded the door open in a shower of wood fragments and rusted screw shavings. The fireplace flames danced wildly from the rush of air sucking into the room. Through the haze of their own panicked breaths emerged a figure, filthy bare feet, mud-caked hem of a nightdress. Then the fire illuminated her fully. Wild grey hair formed a wreath around her face, whose etched lines reflected a madness in her silver eyes. Something sharp glinted in her left hand. A shriek from Rachel seemed to break whatever spell had held them motionless. They scrambled for safety as the intruder lunged toward them, slashing a large butcher knife through the air. Brad shoved past the old woman, only to have his shirt sliced open across the back. Stumbling down the staircase, he crashed into Jason, who lost his footing. Both tumbled painfully down the final few steps. The others vaulted over their fallen friends, racing down the dark corridor toward the front door. It wouldn't budge. Brandon threw his weight against it repeatedly to no avail while the rest pounded the walls in search of some other escape route. "Let us out!" James bellowed at the woman who had slowly pursued them from the top of the stairs. She tilted her face down to meet his gaze, her lips curling into a demented smile. Pointing the crimson-smeared knife toward the ceiling, she began whispering something only she could interpret. Blood trickled down her forearm from the self-inflicted wound she seemed completely unfazed by. The front door frame started to subtly vibrate behind Brandon's back. Then came 3 loud, deliberate knocks. Brandon spun around, stunned to see the heavy wooden door now slightly askance, as if it had been opened. Before he could announce this unsettling revelation to the others, the walls started rumbling violently. Pictures smashed to the floor, their shattered glass spraying outward. The booming stereo speakers toppled from their perch, sparks shooting from severed wires. Cracks formed in the ceiling plaster, raining down dust and pebbles, while Rachel cried into James's shoulder. Was the house coming down around them? At that moment, Jason spotted keys hanging next to the gaping hole that had been their fortress entrance. Snatching them off the nail, he shoved his full weight once more against the door to no avail. "Windows!" he bellowed, hoping some gaps still existed where they could escape this surreal scene. Brad immediately heaved an armchair through the nearest portrait-adorned one, but the heavy frames didn't yield. James double-checked the lock on the front entrance before grabbing a poker from the freestanding ashy fireplace. Gripping it like a baseball bat, he channeled all adrenaline and fear into smashing anything that came into his weapon's path. "Upstairs," the spectre whispered hoarsely from her stairway vantage point. Alex stood behind her almost in solidarity, gazing down at her friends with void eyes. Mimicking the ghost woman, Alex's translucent face eerily conveyed the message again. "Come upstairs." The aged floorboards moaned under their frantic footsteps as they retreated from the shattered remains of their perceived safety the living room once held. Taking the rickety steps 2 at a time proved treacherous, most of them stumbling often. All were slick with blood and sweat by now. Reaching the top, Brad snatched Alex's limp hand in an attempt to jolt her from the apparent mind control she'd succumbed to. Her unexpected scream exploded in their ears as she twisted her arm loose and fled down the dark hallway in front of them. They reluctantly followed, entering a passage of endless doors with no way of discerning the vicious subscriber from invited guest. Which rooms did the house want them in? Jason flung open the nearest door and promptly vomited into what looked like an old child's room, judging by the small bed and scattered toys. Wallpaper printed with out-of-focus balloons curled down in long, peeled strips, revealing crumbling plaster underneath. The pungent stench implied this chamber hadn't been accessed in ages. Fleeting forms moving through weeping holes in the damaged walls hinted at inhabitation by less than welcoming hosts, so he quickly backed out. Where had Alex gone? And that knife-wielding wraith? "I saw Alex run through there!" Brandon bellowed with a surge of hope as he pushed through a doorway further into darkness. Joy leached out and dread flooded back in as the others tentatively crossed the threshold, flame aloft, only to have the door sucked violently shut behind them. It would have shattered James's nose had he not recoiled in time. Brad immediately gripped the ornate glass and brass knob, refusing to let go when it jiggled aggressively against his palm. "Come out! It's just us!" Brad yelled unsuccessfully into the pitch-black space. James hastily sparked a book of matches, revealing a master bedroom dotted by lit candles on every conceivable surface. Their firelight granted visibility to a scene so inexplicable it muted any logical reaction. Once their vision fully adjusted, disbelief remained along with intensifying fear. Alex sat cross-legged in the center of a ring of blood-scrawled symbols, arms upturned on her lap. Dozens of candles encircled her makeshift altar, offering flickering light to a scene that would have seemed ridiculous, if not so hauntingly ritualistic. Her face remained pale and expressionless, until noticing her catatonic state had been disrupted. "Go away!" Alex screamed in a voice not fully her own. "I will handle her myself!" Venom laced what should have been a familiar tone. Brandon grabbed Rachel by the shoulders to keep her from running to embrace Alex in confused desperation. James crouched and touched a blood sigil, inhaled sharply, then stood upright. "Guys, I think this is hers. She wrote this." Alex flashed him a slow, malevolent smile as confirmation. It appeared fully corrupted, with none of the warmth or whimsy he was so fond of. She lifted her right hand slowly so they could witness the deep, self-inflicted gouge she gripped. Dark blood still oozed down her thin arm. A loud crash reverberated from an unseen corner of the expansive bedroom, making them jump. Tattered lace curtains billowed over a window ledge from an errant summer breeze. James quickly lit more matches, passing some to Jason to extend their scope of visibility before being cast back into the dark. Shapeless forms darted behind mouldy clawfoot sofas and oil portraits suspended from fraying ropes. Mouse nests dotted the floorboards in every corner. One remained occupied by beady eyes reflecting the flame light, their owner hesitating on whether to stay or flee this new demon in its midst. The only credenza still possessing doors had been flung open, one barely hanging on a single hinge. Shattered china that once held a place of pride littered the scarred wooden floor beneath. Any residual energy from Alex's apparent blood ritual still saturated the stale air, intermingling with unseen forces already lurking there. Brad repeatedly tested the stubborn door behind him with no results. On the third shoulder-jarring try, the brass knob ripped free in his hand, unsettling any hope of a quick exit. "Guys," Brad urged hoarsely, "we need to stick together no matter what crazy shit happens, and get Alex." She had risen fluidly to her feet during the chaos, watching them huddle closer with more malevolence than seemed possible from her slight frame. She raised her wounded hand deliberately while backing into a halo of candle glow. "Scarred by light, healed in blood," Alex whispered slowly before blowing out the two nearest candles. A formless mass on the wall behind her wavered into focus. The ghost woman had re-emerged where candles still burned, observing Alex in her self-mutilating glory with appeased admiration. Alex slowly smeared the blood down her cheek like war paint, leaving a gruesome trail down her jawline. Rachel buried her head against Brandon's chest to escape the nightmarish scene of her possessed best friend. Hot tears spilled down her face, with the painful realization she couldn't reach the Alex trapped behind those cold, inhuman eyes. She began praying under her breath for salvation, deliverance, anything. Brandon swiftly pulled Rachel toward the doorframe. Finding Alex was no longer a priority. Escape took over. Their feet barely hit the ground, pounding down that corridor, where each step heralded the potential for salvation or doom. Blindly reaching outward while running full force, Brandon grasped what felt like a doorknob and used momentum to fling himself and Rachel forward into the unknown. 3 more steps brought James and Brad to the same conclusion, having lost sight of Jason, or any sane person, in that disturbing bedroom tableau. Screaming defiance mixed with pleading cries echoed down the corridor, their sources impossible to place as they all scrambled for personal preservation. "Almost there. Get downstairs," Brad wailed over his shoulder. His voice possessed a terrified tone none of them had heard before tonight, which amplified the peril they felt. James was the first to reach the top landing, breathing so hard from exertion and adrenaline he didn't notice the large pool of blood at the base of the stairs. One misplaced step sent him airborne down the remaining flight, head bouncing off the floorboards with a thick thud. Disoriented and in searing pain, clarity wouldn't grace James again that night. Jason backed up against the grime-coated bedroom wall, transfixed by the hellish ritual transpiring feet away. He flinched, watching Alex mutilate herself without a second thought. The noble intention of saving her, or whatever she had become, melted away with each macabre second. Fear rooted him right there despite his friends' screams, fading into the distance as they fled the scene without a backward glance. He momentarily wondered if he'd rot away forever in this god-forsaken house just like that lunatic ghost. How long had she been trapped here? And why was Alex so willingly joining her netherworld sorority? The wraith slid her long, blood-stained fingers around Alex's throat from behind, eliciting no response from her enraptured victim. Those unearthly silver eyes lifted to meet Jason's horrified stare for a lingering moment. He thought he saw morbid anticipation of his capture flickering deep within those chilling spaces, as if 2 predators had cornered their chosen late-night snack. An involuntary whimper escaped Jason's throat. The ghost tightened her claw-like grip on Alex's neck slightly, and Jason swore he saw a forked tongue edge from between her thin, colourless lips to lovingly caress Alex's cheek. Revulsion and nauseous fear detonated within the pit of his stomach. Jason bolted from the room screaming, his cries of shocked disgust echoing through the cavernous house. He had to get downstairs. That's where the others would surely be trying to revive themselves to figure out a means of escape. He tore his focus from the unseen, portrait-lined hallway now closing in around him in the darkness, and concentrated solely on not tumbling down the stairs as James had minutes before. Breath came so hard and fast it couldn't keep up with the panicked pace his heart set. Half sliding down the final steps, Jason once again found himself tripping over a body. This one still warm with life's blood spreading beneath it. Moonlight danced across James's face, highlighting the gash on his forehead, still seeping although deathly pallor overtook the surrounding skin. Jason dropped hard onto his knees against his will, solidarity and remorse gripping him relentlessly until James's eyes shot open. He drew in ragged breaths like a drowning victim abruptly yanked to shore. Bleary recognition registered as Jason helped his friend slowly sit upright against the last chunky newel post, the unravelling bandage plastered across James's head, now dotted with dirt and debris from the floorboards. Relief flooded through the friends. James extended a quivering hand to grip Jason's shoulder in silent thanks, hope flickering behind the pain in his eyes once again. The front door against which they slumped began to rattle and warp under a heavy pounding. Both scrambled backward just as the last of the hinge screws clattered to the floor, the entire door frame splintering explosively inward under one final sledgehammer of force. A hulking figure emerged from the jagged opening left gaping, an unkempt beard failing to obscure scarred and dirt-encrusted skin pulled taut across sharp bones. Matted, greasy hair clung to the wild man's elongated face, the flesh of which barely concealed the musculature and veins tensed within. The only intelligible words to escape his mouth were sputtered through impressively large teeth, as if unaccustomed to human speech. "Where is she?" His white eyes burned at them, seeming to glow with restrained rage like headlights in a midnight fog. Limp, twig-like appendages hung at his sides as if any remaining nerve connections had atrophied from lack of use. The two friends gripped each other. Certain escape was no longer possible, yet still refusing to yield to the evil so determined to consume them. The feral man paused from the interrogation. Jason and James were too paralyzed to really process, much less answer, slowly turning his face up toward the light of the full moon, then back again. In the quicksilver flash of lunar glow, lips curled back further to reveal jagged yellow teeth, aligning with a guttural cry from its cavernous mouth that caused eyes to water against the rotten stench. Hands with curved claws for nails extended toward the two students, still scrambling backward across dusty floor planks, flinching while bracing for the diseased touch they were sure would mean the most hideous death. Jason cried out as those claws found purchase in his ankle, but he managed to kick free before being dragged across the foyer floor any farther. James had almost reached the gaping hole where their fortress door once stood. Lunging unsteadily to his feet, Jason prepared to follow James's lead when a blood-curdling scream of "No!" ripped through the air. All three whipped their heads toward the furthest darkened hallway in shock. Alex. Without hesitating, both college kids stumbled over debris-strewn flooring toward that horrifying yet still familiar voice. She had emerged to walk steadily into a shaft of moonlight cascading across the weathered planks, wrapping her willowy arms around herself. Once her lovely face became visible, the young men gasped. No warmth or humor lingered there anymore. Lips cracked and bleeding framed vacuous eyes sunken into purple hollows. Greasy hair strung around her shoulders, where lesions marred the alabaster skin left exposed by her tattered black dress. "My God, Alex!" James rasped in dismay. "What has she done to you?" Before Alex could reply, the imposing figure that burst through the demolished door was upon them. Snarling in rage, he hurled James across the room, then lifted Alex by the shoulders, claws drawing trace lines of blood across her collarbones. "You promised her to me!" Spittle flew from gnashing jaws, but Alex showed no trace of fear. Her eerie smile enraged him further. "Yet you send these fools to once again steal my prize. Let her go!" Jason shouted, grabbing a broken table leg from the wreckage scattered nearby. As he swung with all his might at their captor, the makeshift club met only air before being ripped from Jason's grip and tossed aside like kindling. Sudden needle points of pressure tightened around his throat. Collapsing once more against James, who had crawled back, he gasped for air against the powerful hand coiled there, maniacal laughter echoing in their ears. When blotchy darkness threatened Jason's vision, the claw-like grasp abruptly withdrew. Their attacker stumbled backward with a surprised grunt right into a pair of small white hands wielding a large carving blade that smoothly slid into the meaty part of his shoulder. Jason crumpled to the floorboards, retching and heaving in relief despite his bruised throat. Looking up with watery eyes after a moment, he saw ghostly waif Ramona grinning wickedly over her victim's shoulder. She gave the knife blade a slow twisting turn as the man-beast howled. Dark blood seeped lazily from the wound, soaking into expensive Italian silk. Withdrawing the crimsoned knife at an agonizing pace, the spectre whispered her twisted love song. "We could have had eternity, my pet, but you betrayed my heart. Now you will feed the spirits who guard the gate to forever night." A final sputtering cry faded out as the nameless stalker collapsed dead at her feet. Decrepit floor planks consumed the spreading pool of blood until no moisture reflected the impassive moonlight back anymore. "Come." The ghost woman beckoned to Alex in a voice like dead leaves. Shadow elongated in the silver beams, she held out one age-spotted hand. But Alex backed toward James and Jason with fresh resolve in her expression. The hand slowly melted back into the shrouded form with a displeased hiss. Then fog inexplicably flooded the abandoned rooms they all occupied, frigid vapor carrying scents of unseen decay. tendrils wrapped around their shivering bodies with purpose, caressing, beckoning them toward endless midnight. Fatigue suddenly anchored each student to the creaking floor, urging them down into the ageless dark. Rachel pried uselessly at an iron-barred window with an antique fireplace poker, while Brandon scoured their confined surroundings. This small library or office had become their sanctuary, but also prison once that damn door slammed shut behind them. Cursed pictures inevitably hung above crowded bookshelves, their subjects leering from within gilded frames peppered by woodworm trails. An impressive desk took up nearly a fourth of the cramped space, its surface empty save an oil lamp with etched glass panels akin to those downstairs. The heavy drapes had been saturated by years of humidity, now hung motionless and threadbare, revealing ornate marble windowsills beyond with dirt clouding the panes. Rachel slid down the wall in defeat and wept softly into her folded arms. All hope had been cleaved away, leaving only emptiness echoing with the chaotic sounds of a house still tormenting their friends and sacrificing Alex. Brandon crouched to wrap her in his embrace, murmuring comforting words neither really believed anymore but each needed to hear. Running footsteps pounding the corridor jerked their attention back to the impenetrable door. Muffled cries for help elicited more adrenaline-fueled assaults on their caged sanctuary until the unbending oak finally splintered enough for them to kick their way to freedom. Gulping the cleaner night air flooding the passageway, they sobbed in relief. Shadowy forms shuffled ahead in the meagre glow of dying candles fastened crudely on the walls. Brad, clutching a blood-soaked scrap of fabric Brandon recognized as part of his own shirt, struggled to hold up a weakly stumbling James whose head wound had reopened. Dark crimson streaked his neck and shoulder, looking almost black in the inconsistent light. Jason was sliding down the adjacent wall, seemingly devoid of physical damage, but wild-eyed with trauma, while Alex stared vacantly from behind the two survivors. Rachel rushed forth to support James as dead weight, shouting his name through grateful tears. Brandon began assisting Brad with their other friend on the way toward escape. Each asked urgent questions as they descended the main staircase, words fumbling together in chaotic overlap. They froze upon hearing an ominous rumble roll through the cavernous downstairs. The front windows on either side of the stairwell landing started to pulse and crack in rhythmic succession. Several more thunderous blows finally yielded splintered holes large enough to reveal bricks. Solid, weather-worn bricks where glass should have been. Their unified screams barely penetrated the sound barrier those condensing walls created. Darkness, dust, and fear flooded every pore and crevice as they groped for one another, identity fading until oblivion and stone overtook flesh and bone. Yet, had anyone lingered near morning's haloed glow, they might have detected whispered rumours from beneath crumbling foundation stones. Echoed tales stretched back through the decades here, reinforced whenever moonlight permeated the blanket of endless midnight. Each night whispered screams grew fainter, but the house now breathed easier. Fresh spirits chained in the frozen meadow would not allow escape, even if those wall cracks widened enough someday. Not until mould and rot also claimed the souls of future silly trespassers who refused to believe local warnings. Those endless warnings about the brooding house that wept blood tears after its infection spread too deep to ever be truly cured.